Hi everyone! Welcome to the visual guide for the Dancing Plague Extreme. This is one of two new extreme trials made available by patch 5.0 in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. This encounter may appear very difficult at first, and you may find yourself screaming "Puck no" at all the mechanics, but stop finding. I'm here to stop you from flaming all your party finder groups and helping you find peace. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your trial guide. The encounter begins with Bright Sabbath, dealing high raid-wide damage. Healers be ready with those shields and heals. Phantom Rune works in a similar fashion to how it does on normal mode, and it will resolve as one of two possible AoE attacks. On extreme mode, you'll find that the telegraphs do not give you enough time to adjust, and you'll need to use specific boss tells to determine whether you have to move in or out. While there are multiple ways to tell what's coming, I believe the easiest and most obvious way is to look at the position of her wings. If she flies up a bit and spreads her wings, you need to get out. If she stays on the ground and her wings are in, coupled with the swirly circle marker and her staff spinning all around her, you need to get in. This first Phantom Rune will always be the point-blank AoE version, and you'll need to move out of it as quickly as possible. Getting hit by this attack will cause you to lose control over your character. This is especially dangerous in later phases, so be sure to avoid each Phantom Rune as necessary. Up next, Mist Rune will spawn 8 puddles around the room, 4 around the boss in the center and 4 in each corner of the platform. Each puddle has a bubble countdown, and once this countdown finishes, it will spawn an ad unless a player is standing inside of it. To handle this, you'll need to assign each player to stand in each puddle. If something goes wrong and you do accidentally summon an ad, be sure to immediately pick it up and burn it down. Immediately after, TITANIA will cast Flame Rune, which will spawn a large fiery fist above the platform. The 2 healers will then be targeted for Flame Hammer, signified by these stack-up markers. Each hit of Flame Hammer will also debuff you, making it impossible to survive more than 1 hit of the attack. To handle this, you'll need to separate into 2 groups for each healer stack. Each group will be stacked in a puddle to further reduce that fire damage, taking care not to overlap. Next, Divination Rune will cast a massive frontal cone in the direction of the main tank. This does fairly high damage, so pop cooldowns and heal through it as necessary. The tank should also take care to face TITANIA away from the group at all times throughout the encounter. Chain of Brambles will tether each tank and healer to a random damage dealer partner. These thorny vines must be broken as quickly as possible or they will begin to explode, dealing high damage and debuffs to each player. The tethers break based on distance traveled, so an easy way to handle this is to start in the center and have the tanks and healers run to the north, while all the damage dealers run to the south. Once the chains are resolved, TITANIA will return to the center and cast another Phantom Rune. This Phantom Rune will always be the get in version, so make sure you move in as quickly as possible. At this point, TITANIA will cast Midsummer Night's Dream and bring us into the forest. The boss will then mark up a random player with this transferable tether and blast them with Thunder Rune, a large AoE attack that deals high damage and places the Thunder Resist Down debuff on them. Thunder Rune will hit a total of 6 times with a few seconds in between each hit. To handle this, the tether needs to be transferred between hits to players without the debuff. I would recommend assigning an order of players to avoid confusion here. You can also use tank immunities to your advantage, having the off-tank take 3 of the hits before passing it on. In whatever way you choose to handle this, be aware that the AoE blast is quite large, and all players will need to ensure they're not getting hit by this accidentally. Next up, Fey Light will target the primary target and the closest player to them for a heavy hitting frontal cone blast that hits 3 times. Both tanks will need to share this damage with cooldowns, or a solo tank can take all 3 hits with an immunity. TITANIA will then cast Growth Rune, and 2 growing AoE clusters will spawn in 2 diagonal corners in the north and the south. Which corners this spawns in is random, and players will need to quickly identify the unsafe corners. At the same time, all players will be targeted for Chain of Brambles again. To handle this combo of mechanics, tanks and healers will still be running north to break their chains, while the damage dealers will be running south. Since 2 corners will be occupied by the growing vines, each group will need to move to the free corner in either the north or the south. If done correctly, players will break their chains before the vines reach them in those corners, and they can quickly readjust to stand in the safe zones created by the growing vines. As soon as those vines disappear, another Divination Rune will cast. The main tank should make sure to be standing away from the rest of the group to avoid blasting everyone with it. To keep things consistent, we make sure the main tank is always always on the north side of the boss, and all other players know not to be in that area at any time during the encounter. Next up, the boss will cast Frost Rune. This mechanic is identical to that of normal mode, and it's a matter of standing near the last AoE circle to spawn, waiting for the center to explode before moving into safety. As soon as the last Frost Rune AoE resolves, every player will be marked up with the circle AoE marker. You'll need to separate from each other to avoid overlapping damage. Next up, another Phantom Rune. Move in as necessary. At this point, TITANIA will move into the center, become invulnerable, and summon 3 adds onto the west, north, and east sides of the platform. The west and north adds will be picked up by the 2 tanks, while the group focuses down the east add. Each add casts their own special attack until they are destroyed, and you'll need to handle each mechanic as they happen. Damage dealers will need to spread apart to avoid overlapping their peace bomb markers. Everyone will need to avoid the large AoE pattern from Leaf Storm and the single long column AoE attack from Puck in the north. Puck will also cast Pummel on his tank, a heavy-hitting tank buster that also applies a stacking debuff. Theoretically, this debuff makes it difficult to survive subsequent hits of the tank buster, but with the overall damage check required to meet the enrage timer, you shouldn't run into this problem, and a tank swap really isn't necessary. The west add will target his tank with Hard Swipe, a tank buster that does not add a stacking debuff. Both tanks will need to cool down through their respective tank busters as each add is burned down. Once all 3 adds are down, TITANIA will resummon them as bigger and better versions around the platform. Both tanks can grab the same adds while the group begins to burn down Mustard Seed again. You'll have the same attacks to handle along with a few more, all while you're destroying each add. After the first set of AoEs go out, a player will be targeted with this stack up marker. You'll need to group up to share the damage of Puck's breath. Immediately after starts the combo of attacks that is arguably the hardest of the encounter, so let's break it down slow. 2 sets of large vines will spawn in a specific pattern on the platform. These vines will target some portion of the north side of the platform and some portion of the south side of the platform, based on the orientation that they spawn in. These vines will slap down on the platform, destroying anything in their path. At the same time, Puck will slam down, knocking back all players from the center of the platform. On top of all of that, all players will be affected with chains of brambles, and you'll need to also dodge another AoE pattern from Mustard Seed. Now this may seem like a nasty mess of mechanics, but the movement to deal with everything is actually quite simple. Around the time your group destroys Mustard Seed, the vines will begin to appear. Since we know healers and tanks want to go towards the north with their chains and damage dealers want to go towards the south, each group can pre-position towards those areas as soon as Mustard Seed dies. Once the vines pop up, you can quickly determine the single safe corner available to each group. You'll then stand near the center, close to that blue circle marker but not in it, and await the knockback. The knockback itself, if done correctly, will be enough to easily break your chains. You'll then have a few seconds to readjust in a safe zone to avoid the AoE blasts. Immediately after this insane combo, another stack up marker will appear and 2 players will have large circle markers to move away from the group. If you're not affected by one of those markers, group up with the stack up marker to share the damage. While you're handling all of these mechanics, remember to continue your assault on each add. You have until the boss reaches 100 on her gauge to destroy them, or you will die. Once all adds are down, you can stack up and cool down through her ultimate blast. TITANIA will then return to the platform and resume her attack. The mechanics from the first phase will repeat here with some overlap. She'll start off with another Mist Rune, and players will need to be ready to move to their assigned puddles. However, before doing so, she'll cast a Phantom Rune. This Phantom Rune is random, so players will need to be very careful to identify which version she's casting and move in or out as necessary. The way the timing here works is that if you do the Phantom Rune incorrectly, you won't have the ability to stand in your puddle to avoid spawning an add, so be sure to adjust appropriately. As soon as Phantom Rune resolves, all players can then move into their puddles. The next Flame Rune will combo with another Growth Rune, which will spawn 2 growing clusters of vines in the north and the south, or in the east and the west. Depending on the position of the Growth Rune clusters, the 2 stack-up groups will either stay put in their respective puddles, or they'll need to rotate clockwise into the adjacent puddles to avoid the incoming vines. Next, another Phantom Rune. This will be the opposite pattern of the rune that just occurred during the puddles, so be sure to adjust appropriately. Healers will need to deal with another Bright Sabbath AoE blast, and then the boss will cast another Fade-Light combo. Tanks will share and cool down through this damage as necessary. Next, another Frost Rune pattern to avoid, followed by more Uplift AoE circles to move apart. One more Bright Sabbath blast to heal through, and TITANIA will again begin to mark players for Thunder Rune. Have the same order of players handle each Tether blast away from the rest of the group. The next growth rune will coincide with Bramble Chains again and is handled in the same manner. Move into the unaffected corner towards your respective side of the platform to break the chains first, and then move back in before those vines reach you. Another random phantom rune is next, and you'll need to adjust appropriately. This is followed by a second phantom rune, which will be the opposite to the one that was just cast. At this point, Titania will harden rage by casting a beefy Bright Sabbath cast. It can be tricky to maintain uptime as you handle each wacky combo of mechanics, but with time and practice, you'll get her down easy. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we'll look at the Crown of the Immaculate Extreme. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.